What's up, Power Project Familia? We always talk about getting your blood work done and understanding what's going on underneath the hood. And we finally have partnered with the company Merrick Health, that we've partnered and made the Power Project panel. We've had Derek for More Plates, More Dates, and a bunch of our experts go through and pick the 26 different labs that are going to be the most important for you. And the cool thing about Merrick is typically when you get lab work done, you look at the stuff, you don't know how to interpret it. Well, with our partnership with Merrick, there's going to be a doctor that will help you interpret everything with your blood work so you can see what you need to supplement or what you need to potentially get as far as HRT, exactly what you need to do for your total health. So absolutely check them out. Andrew, can you tell the people how to get it?
I will. And one other thing I wanted to mention, because you just said TRT, HRT, whatever. If you're not ready for that sort of thing, they actually will tell you in your written report your hormone or the hormone lab, where you score, where a normal score is, and if you are imbalanced, what you can do to help kind of get your levels back in line where they should be. And it's going to be with your food, lifestyle, or eventually supplements. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to go jump on a needle. That's not what they're all about, but they are about optimizing your whole body, optimizing your hair. If you have some hair loss issues or whatever, and you want to help address those, sexual health, all this good stuff. They are a one-stop shop, and it's not just a pop-up shop. These guys have been vetted by Derek for More Plates, More Dates, and like Nsima said, this is a panel that we put together with industry leaders. So that way you guys can have the absolute best panel so you can know everything you need to know and have a doctor do a one-on-one consultation with you. But the only way to get it is to head over to merrickhealth.com/powerproject. That's MAREK health.com/powerproject. You guys will see the Power Project panel. This has all those 26 labs that Nsima just talked about. Load that into your cart, and at checkout, use promo code PowerProject for $101 off of that panel. It's invaluable. You guys need to head over there right now. Cool. Speaking of live, we are live now.
No way.
We are live.
You feel that, Doug?
I'm feeling it.
We're live.
The vibe.
We got you some cold brew.
It's electric.
We got you some nitro coffee.
And here we go.
Ready to be launched into outer space. Last time you were on the show, you caused quite a stir. And
sorry about that.
You made... I don't know what you're trying to do. You're making a lot of enemies out there.
I'm frustrating a lot of people who want to believe that the Holy Grail is still the Holy Grail.
Right. So what do you think are some of the things that are some misinterpretations of, like, a lot of times the stuff that you're communicating about, you're oftentimes saying that some of these exercises might not be as effective for the particular result that someone's looking for. For example, something like the squat, which people hate to have the squat attack. They feel like you're attacking their family or something.
Sacrilegious. Yeah, absolutely.
Something like that. But your whole point is that there's nothing really wrong with the squat, but if you're trying to utilize the squat to be the most efficient thing to grow your quads, you might want to learn more information about it so you can dissect and you can pick better exercises. There might be a better way. There might be more efficient exercises to get the result that you're looking for to grow your quads. Is that kind of right? Well, am I kind of on the right track?
Yes. Look, here's I guess you could say the misunderstanding is that people think that what I'm teaching, which is biomechanics, is an excuse to train light, is an excuse to use less weight. And so I say, no. Physics is physics. You can use physics to magnify load, or you can use physics to minimize load. The same biomechanics that I teach in my book about how to maximize muscle load for muscle growth can be used to minimize muscle load to maximize output. In other words, a powerlifter can use the same principles, but in reverse. So I'm not trying to find a way to train lighter, but if your objective is to load the quads, then you would be wise to understand how to maximize the physics so that you don't have to use as much weight. You can use less weight and get more load and, strain your skeleton, strain your spine far less than you're doing with a conventional exercise.
I think a great place to start then would be, we were just doing some sissy squats in the gym with the slant board. And obviously it's a sissy squat, so didn't feel any spinal load, felt great contraction and great feeling in the quads. Can you explain why that sissy squat? I'm only using 150 pounds or whatever. Why it's more beneficial for direct quad hypertrophy than doing something like a squat or a leg press or even a hack squat.
Yeah, absolutely. So the basic physics principle is that a pendulum, which is hanging vertically, is parallel to resistance, gravity, right? So it's neutral. It's a zero lever. If you take that pendulum and you swing it up so that it's horizontal, it's a maximum lever. 100% of the available resistance will be loading onto that muscle. If it's somewhere between vertical and horizontal, it will load the muscle with a percentage between 0 and 100%. To make things simple, I just say a 45-degree lever is a 50% active lever. Okay, so if you're doing a regular squat, your lower leg, which is the lever being operated by your quadricep, only tilts from the neutral vertical position by about 30 degrees, which means you're only getting about 30% of the available resistance, which is your body weight plus the weight on your back. Okay, if you're doing a sissy squat and you allow that lower leg to get horizontal, now you're using a 100% lever. So to put some numbers to it, I usually say if you're a 200-pound guy, got 200 pounds on your back, 400 divided by 2 legs, and you can do the math of the magnifier of the length of your lower leg and all that, you're getting about 950 pounds of load per quadricep. But if you do a sissy squat, you weigh 200 pounds, no additional weight. You'll load each of your quadriceps with 1,200 pounds of resistance. That is more stimulation for growth, period. Doesn't matter that you're not using as much weight on your back. What matters is what the quadricep is experiencing. So when we're doing the cable squat, that cable is perpendicular to your lower leg, and you're getting 100% of the weight you're using, and you're loading more quadriceps with less weight and nothing on your spine. So if your objective is to load the muscle, and it should be, right? If your objective is not lifting the most amount of weight you can lift, but instead getting the most amount of growth, you should be using the mechanics that makes you magnify the resistance more, not minimize it more. I
think this sounds incredible for people that are just starting out, or for older folks that want to load the muscles, rather than just, go in there and just learn how to squat just for the sake of squatting and squatting more weight. The argument on the other side would be, and I'd like to kind of get your point of view on this, a squat can, people have built a great body off of squatting, and a lot of other exercises, and maybe a lot of other things too. So it's hard to identify what exactly is causing what, right? But some people would say, hey, squat, bench, deadlift, bent over row, military press, those are kind of the fundamental exercises that everyone's done for a long time, and they can help build some mass. What are your thoughts on that? And like, you're saying 30, it's only working 30% of the quad muscle. No, I didn't say that. 30% of the weight you're using is loading the quad muscle. What percentage of the quad muscle is getting utilized in a regular squat, or does that depend on? The whole muscle, it's all or nothing. When a muscle contracts, it contracts all or nothing. Now, but you are hitting on something different here, and that is when you're activating the hip extensors at the same time as you are in a squat, you're deactivating the hip flexors, part of which is the quadricep. Which is the rectus femoris. So now you have a neurological conflict in addition to the mechanical conflict. So you're not getting optimum quadricep stimulation with a barbell squat. You're just not. And then what are your thoughts on like a squat, just kind of building overall body strength? Let's just say that you are going to do a body weight squat. Great. Okay, because the cost is low. There's nothing on your spine. Okay, you're working your cardiovascular system, you're working your glutes, you're working your quads, you're working your balance, you're working your athleticism, all good stuff. Once you start to increase the weight, once you start to go 200, 300, 400 pounds on your spine, the cost goes up. Then you have to start saying, am I getting a commensurate benefit to the quadricep? And the answer is no. You're getting a diminishing percentage of benefit to the quadricep as you're getting an increased cost. What if you're not necessarily concerned about the quad and you're just like trying just to get big? Like, you don't care that it works your back and your traps and your butt, and you're actually excited that it does all those different things because you're trying to get kind of bang for your buck, so to speak. Well, again, you are getting quadricep and glute and erector spinae and athleticism and all that. That's true. If you want to do only one exercise, the squat is fine. But if you want maximum quad development and maximum glute development, and maximum erector spinae development, you would do better by doing 3 different exercises, and you'd get more mass, more size, more growth.
So this is the thing. This is where I find it funny when I look at the YouTube comments, especially after the last episode we did, and we've had other guests on and we've talked about this stuff. People think people want to be on either one side or the other. I like to marry things, right? So I bought your book and I've been using a lot of the movements from the book, but I've still been squatting. I've still been doing a lot of like deep knee flexion squats, etc., while still adding in a lot of this work, because I know that if you're someone who likes to squat and progress that, and like if you're a powerlifter, that's your sport. But let's say you're an athlete that likes squatting, okay, you can squat, but then you can also add in sissy squats, etc., and all these other movements. And I do understand that the squat is somewhat of a taxing movement, so you need to be careful with how much you load it so it doesn't take too much away from other movements that you do. But there should be no reason, depending on the intention of the lifter. If the intention of the lifter is like, I just want to maximally load my quads and nothing else, I don't care what movements I do, sissy squat. Right? But if an athlete wants to progress other movements, get for the squat, get all these other muscles working while also using movements that will massively activate the quads, there should be no reason why we can't just add all these into a decent program.
I don't disagree.
Exactly.
No, I mean, look, if you're trying, and this is common, right? You get a guy who says, I want to be big, but I also enjoy the process of squatting. I enjoy the camaraderie. I enjoy, the feeling of the weight on my back. Great. I'm not saying that you're going to distract from the gains you got from the sissy squat because you added squats. No, that's not going to happen. It's just more of. If you're just comparing the two, one versus the other, you're going to get more quad with the sissy squat, period. Yeah. But if you're not talking about just quad development and you don't mind doing more work and you enjoy doing more work, you can absolutely marry them.
So I have a question about this then. People in bodybuilding who are focused on maximizing the tension on specific muscle groups and needing growth, what are they doing wrong?
Wait, is this
in training?
This is a departure from the squat question.
This is a departure from the squat question. Okay. Now we're not talking about powerlifters, right? Who care about squat, bench, deadlift, and the strength of these movements, but they also do want to get big over time too. But now we're talking specifically about bodybuilders whose intention is making each muscle group as absolutely big as possible. When you see people training,
right,
what are they not thinking about? What are they doing wrong when they approach their training for hypertrophy purposes?
Okay, well, and they're doing multiple things wrong.
Let's hear it, yeah.
The first thing they're doing wrong is they're conflating how much weight they're lifting with how much load they're getting on the muscle. And they're not the same thing. Okay, so in order to understand that the amount of muscle load a muscle is getting might be more, even though you're using less weight, you have to understand a little bit of physics. And some people just can't wrap their head around physics. Right. To
it's
them,
complicated.
Well,
a little bit.
I mean, look, you know that a longer lever is going to magnify something more than a shorter lever. If you've got a sledgehammer with a 3-foot handle, it's going to be a lot harder to lift than one that's got a 2-foot handle, right? So that's physics, right? Bottom line. I'll give you another one. I wanted to bring a scale here. I had the scale made, but it was just going to be too heavy to bring, and it wasn't going to show enough. But basically what I have is 2 6-inch levers coming off a pivot, right? So, and each one has a basket underneath there. So what I was going to show was a 30-degree lever on this side and a horizontal lever on this side. 1/4 of the weight that's here is here. So 4 times more here. This lever, limb, lower leg, requires 4 times more weight to get the same amount of load as this lever does at horizontal. That's physics, right? So if you think that squatting 200 pounds or 300 pounds is going to give you more quadricep load just because it looks more challenging, feels more challenging than a sissy squat, that's a mistake. Plain and simple, that's a mistake. But the other thing that people make mistakes in bodybuilding is that there's 16 principles, in fact, that optimize an exercise to a particular muscle. One of them, of course, is, full range of motion, alignment, early phase loading, the avoidance of neurological conflicts. All of these things act like a checklist, right? So if, let's just say you're analyzing an exercise and of the 16, 6 are not in compliance. Well, that's going to be less than optimal. Not as bad as one that was 10 out of compliance, but you can actually find the ones that have the least departure from compliance and say, well, then that one is the most productive exercise. The problem is that we've been lulled into thinking that you need constant variety, you need to work the muscle from every angle. No, a delta only has one side, delta only has one angle, right? That's all it does, right? So early phase load that, full range of motion, don't rotate the joint, opposite position loading, make sure that the muscle is directly opposite the line of force. boom, you've got your best exercise. Just because you're not side lateraling as much as you would overhead press does not mean the deltoid is underloaded.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. When you started to learn some of this stuff, was it kind of tough for you to like implement it or believe it? Or you kind of like, I don't know about this. Like this sounds different. This sounds unconventional, but maybe I should give it a try.
Well, first of all, let me just say, it wasn't like I heard it from someone, right? I mean, I discovered this, right? I remember the first time I was 16 years old, the first time I discovered that if I raise the pulley from the ground level up to my hip level and I do a sideways with it, it's heavier at the beginning and it's easier. I can actually hold it here. I can't hold a dumbbell if I'm doing it the same way, right? So you learn, you go, well, and I've never cared about impressing people with how much weight I was lifting. So I didn't have to have this emotional like, oh my God, I have to leave this exercise that, you know, all my buddies pat me on the back for, right? That's the problem, is there's an emotional attachment that some people have to these exercises, but for the wrong reason. It's not because it's most efficient, even though they might think it is. And as you said, it's because they're doing a lot of things. They look good, they're big, right? And so they assume that their favorite exercise is the one that's responsible for all this growth, but it may not very well be true.
And they might have habits that, you know, extend all day long to help their body be bigger, you know, and they could even be they could be performance enhanced. They could be getting their sleep in. They could be eating properly. And then they're telling you about the squats that they do.
And they're more invested in that exercise. In other words, they just say that you think that squats is the king of quad exercises. So you're going to do 20 sets of squats. And oh, by the way, you might do 3 or 4 sets of leg extensions. Well, you're not going to get the growth from the leg extension because you're not invested into it.
Right.
So Doug, we actually had a pretty cool question from the live chat. Let me pull it up here. Where'd it go? From Samuel. How does Doug train adductors, hip flexors without squats?
Well, the adductor works because it's part of hip extension. If you look at anatomy, you can see that, you know, and by the way, part of the reason why adductors work during squat is because of hip extension. So you can get, you know, adductors by moving your legs in and out on a machine, but that's not its primary function. Its primary function is to push the femur down. So you're going to get that with a hip extension machine. Now, I realize not everyone has a hip extension machine, and that is a little bit of a problem. It is by far the best way to work the glutes for a number of reasons. First of all, it's one leg at a time, which means you avoid bilateral deficit. For those that don't know what that is, that just means there's a little bit of a weakening on each side when both sides are working at the same time. You're also not putting anything on your spine. You're also getting the entire femur length magnification. So when you're working your glutes and your adductors by way of hip extension.
Andrew, could you pull up a hip extension machine on a picture?
Yeah.
So your femur is pushing downward by way of the glutes and the adductors, but it's pushing downward against the the tibia, which is doubling under it. So it's actually shortening the length of that glute moment arm. So you're getting half the magnification you would get if you were able to apply the resistance right at the end of the femur, which is what you do when you do a glute machine. You put that roller right at the end of the femur, you get full magnification, you get continuous tension, right? So you have resistance at the beginning, resistance at the end, and you get a much longer range of motion than you would get from a squat. You can bring that leg all the way up here. You're not going to bring your leg all the way up here when you're squatting. And then when you push it down, you can squeeze that glute against an opposing resistance instead of just ending up with zero. So for all these reasons, that machine, hip extension machine, is best for both the glutes and the adductors as compared to a squat.
So this would be the greatest booty builder.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's ironic that most gyms don't have one because most gyms have a leg extension and a leg curl machine.
And even a hip thrust.
Right. And a leg extension, leg curl machine is the exact same principle. Loading the end of the lever that is operated by your target muscle.
So, what are your thoughts on a hip thrust?
You mean like a glute bridge?
Yeah.
Yes.
So the problem with a glute bridge, let's just say you're going to do it on the floor. Okay, you can see that the amount of hip range of motion you're getting is very small, right? You're not bringing your femur all the way up to your chest, right? If you're on the floor, you're only going to come basically to a 90-degree angle from your torso, if that. Right? It's also end phase loaded. Muscles are stronger in the early phase, right? So when you come up, you get a lot of contraction, so it feels like it's effective. But what is more effective is to early phase loaded and lighter phase end loaded, Okay, so that's one problem. The other problem is you put a barbell on your lap, right? And that's not so great on your hip bones. And then what you may have noticed is some people, as they raise up, they actually push the bar down onto their femurs, right? Why are they doing that? Because subconsciously they're shortening the lever. It makes them feel stronger because it feels easier because they're shortening the lever. Right. So you're fooling yourself with that. Plus, then you say, okay, I'm going to put my back on this bench, which is going to help me get more range of motion in the hip. Okay, well now, for all these people that are worried about leg extensions, shearing your knee, they don't worry about shearing the knee when you do a side plank, which they should. And they don't worry about shearing the spine when you've got one end holding the bridge up on your shoulders and then the rest of it trying to come down toward the ground, right? So it's not the greatest thing for your back. Certainly not comfortable to get in and out of. Certainly not as effective as the unilateral hip machine, which allows you to have nothing on your back in a perfectly comfortable position, one leg at a time. By the way, another thing that happens, some of you have noticed, is you get a hamstring cramp when you do this.
Sometimes.
And why does that happen? Well, it happens for one of two reasons. It happens either because if the ground was slick, your feet would probably slide forward, right? That means that you're actually activating your quadricep, right? Because of the friction force, right? Activation of the quadricep deactivates the hamstring. The hamstring wants to participate in hip extension, but now can't because you've shut it off. That could be the hamstring cramping, or it could be the fact that you're over shortening the hamstring because the knee is bent and the hip is extending, so you're getting active insufficiency.
A major thing I noticed on that particular exercise is people don't finish the exercise either. They don't contract all the way through. So they go to push the barbell up with their hips, and you see them kind of get close to the end range of motion, but they usually don't get there because they're usually using too much weight. Yeah. I've seen this exercise go from years and years ago. It was a rehab exercise, and it looked like it was a pretty good one for people with lower back issues and to get some blood into the hamstrings and the butt.
It's better than nothing.
Yeah, and it's body weight, rather than, but it turned into like people trying to use 3 plates on it.
Well, again, it's the conflation. It's the idea that I'm going to do something that looks impressive, and if I do that multi-hip machine, no one's going to pay any attention to me. No one's going to stand by there and, dude, that was rad. No, but they're going to do that if you've got 315 or 405 on a glute bridge.
So just real quick, because so I did I tried to simulate the hip hinge machine with the cable, and so my foot went from here to here. I did as best I could.
The range of motion.
That was Saturday. I'm still extremely sore from doing that. So my question for you is, and this just goes along with anybody that discovers something new. That was the first time I did that. So now I'm like telling everybody, this is the one you got to do because I'm so sore. So are people that try this, are they getting sore because they're just activating new muscles that they maybe haven't?
Well,
is it just because it's working better than anything they've ever done?
It is true that anything new will make you sore. So that can't be ignored. And I'm not here to, create some fantasy thing. I mean, I'll admit that sometimes, something feels like it's working, even though it's not for the wrong reason. But what's happening probably in your case is that you're using a range of motion that you had not experienced before. You were doing now full range of motion. Your hip was probably bending somewhere between 110 degrees, right? And a glute bridge maybe will give you maybe 90 degrees, maybe 80 degrees, maybe 70 degrees, depending on your form. But you're getting full range of motion and you're doing it unilaterally.
Yeah.
So you're not having to, deal with the bilateral deficit, and you're also, getting a more natural resistance curve to the muscle, something that it is more suited to adapt to. Now, you were explaining to me before the show, there's a good way and a bad way to do that. Not necessarily a bad way, but if you're too close to the pulley, and this, by the way, for those of you that don't know, you wrap a strap around your femur just above your knee, and you have the D-ring above it. So you connect your cable to the D-ring, and then you push that femur down and back. If you're too close to it, then when you extend your leg down, that thing's going to want to slide up your leg, and it's not going to feel very comfortable, plus you're not going to get much resistance. So you have to stand back away from the pulley, so you get a little less resistance at the beginning.
And is the resistance
but more, So when you extend, you still have some perpendicularness to your femur, and then you're going to get kind of the best range of motion, given that you don't have, a circular pulley.
That's what I was actually going to ask you next. So if somebody doesn't have a multi-hip machine, they would wrap that around their knee. Right. And then they would kind of simulate a multi-hip machine. That would be the best way to do that.
There's a product for you. A strap that goes around the femur with a D-ring, because you can't find that.
Build that ass up.
You know, yeah, the same thing as the Velcro strap with the D-ring for the ankle.
Right.
That's your job.
Make a little larger one.
Yeah, make it so that it goes around the femur, and that's yours. I'm not going to take that.
Yo, we're about to create such fat.
I would.
Let me stop my state. Well, yeah, fat asses. We're about to create a bunch of fat. This is great.
Yeah.
I got you.
Well, that's what the I guess the attachment we'll call it, just like the big ass, whatever.
The ass builder.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, fat ass.
The fat ass.
Is that PHAT?
PHAT? Yeah, man,
We have the big ass hip circle.
Yeah.
Do you, in your opinion, are some of these exercises worthless, or are they still doing something?
You mean the conventional?
Just any exercises, just like
Oh.
stuff you see people do in the gym. I mean, if people are grabbing a hold of some weights and moving around, and they're not going to hurt themselves, are they still getting any benefits?
Yes, they definitely are. Look, Mo and I joke about this. Mo Larby, my partner in Smart Training 365, we talk about it's better than eating potato chips on a couch, right? So anything is better than nothing, right? But those of us that invest a lot of energy into this stuff, we want to make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for the buck, the biggest reward for the investment, right? So if I explain to you that you're going to get this house, but you're going to pay 3 times more for it than you could have, you're going to pay attention because it's money, right? But sometimes we don't pay attention when it's just, energy. Well, I don't want to waste my energy either.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that might bother some people, and the big aspect of working out is enjoyment, right? So when Mark was mentioning a useless exercise, like I don't do them because I don't find them enjoyable, but a lot of people like barbell curls, right? They like the barbell bicep curl. I don't. But they find that movement enjoyable. Like, I want to load on this. And that's something that gets people fired up to actually go and train. So some people, even though something might be optimal and the most efficient way to do something, when they do it for long enough, they're bored and they're like, where's my new toy?
No, so I get it.
It's like, if people could figure out how to add in a few of their new toys, right? So that they can enjoy their exercise, but still have things that are really good for the muscle, right? They can still be moving in the right direction, because we know that a big part of training for a long time is training enjoyment.
Right.
And if you don't enjoy what you're doing, if you like, a lot of people like bench press, right? If you don't enjoy bench pressing, but you think you have to bench press for a big chest, it's like there's no reason to really do it, right? So we got to figure out.
And you're happy to hear that you don't have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You're happy to hear you don't have to. So I think that's a big aspect of it. You can still put in things you like, but still figure out ways to put in things that are really going to load those muscles if that's your actual intention.
So let me be clear here. So, because I think there's a misunderstanding that's going on. The Brick 20 is not to suggest these work and those don't.
Yeah.
Okay, the Brick 20 happens to be the exercise that rate the highest. Mm-hmm. But what I teach in my book is how to measure the efficiency of an exercise, period. And we're talking about degrees of good and degrees of bad, right? You can do whatever you want to do as long as you understand the degree of good and the degree of bad of each exercise. I teach principles. That's what I teach, how to evaluate an exercise. And once you know those things, you can say, oh, well, I don't care if this gives me 20% less benefit and costs me 30% more energy. It's fine. I'm going to do it. But you know why. You know that it's worth doing, and here's why it's worth doing, because 20% less benefit, 30% more energy is no big deal to you. Mm-hmm. But it's not about, I never say deadlift is something you should not do. But I do say, here's the good, here's the bad, you decide.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a time and place for each thing. Like, you may want to do a complex with some kettlebells due to what it's going to do to like your heart rate. And you're not necessarily just after the muscle in those particular moments. And then there's like, for me, there's like stages of my workout. Usually I start my workout with something heavier and I progress into more of kind of a bodybuilding style workout. Sometimes I'll work out a little opposite of that. That way I can use less weight on the more compound exercises. But I almost always have like a finisher, something where I'm trying to get my heart rate up. And whether that's right or wrong, what it does, it allows me to kind of play in a bunch of different sandboxes during the workout. Right. And it's been something that's been useful for me just to be able to train for 30 plus years. Yeah. And so, sometimes we are looking at like, hey, what's the most optimal? Other times we might just be thinking, I would just really enjoy making it through the workout for today.
Yeah.
That would be a victory.
Well, Nsima, so here's a thing that's right up your alley. So you grapple, right? So let's just say you're grappling with a guy for half an hour and you both get a good workout during the grappling, right? Well, none of those things you did were ideal for muscle building. But the event was fun because you spent a lot of energy and you just feel exhilarated. Well, kettlebell, same thing, right? So there are a lot of exercises that are athletic, challenging in non-specific ways. They're not the best thing for that muscle or this muscle, but they're fun and they make you overall strong and they make you enjoy your workouts. I'm all for that. I've said it so many times. I'm not telling people to not do those things. I'm just saying once you understand the physics, once you understand the principles that determine less and more energy and more magnification to the muscle load, once you understand those things and you choose to use it for the sake of muscle building, then you can narrow it down to the Brig 20. But you can use the same principles to say, well, how do I increase output? How do I increase my squat? How do I increase my bench press? If a horizontal lever magnifies the load the most and a vertical lever minimizes it the most, how do I incorporate that? So it's the principles I'm teaching. I'm not saying this is how you eliminate power lifts.
I don't know about Andrew and Nsima, but the way that I use your information is for my own convenience. So you don't really love incline bench press. I actually suck at incline bench press. So I'm like, you got to look at Doug Brignole's research and his information. He says you don't need this exercise.
Super convenient. Yeah.
Let's talk about actually the chest real quick because the decline chest press or the decline dumbbell chest press, right, is the movement in the Brig 20 that is ideal for chest, and you don't see people decline chest pressing. You barely ever see that. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
And how we can build some big pecs with the decline chest press.
Well, the first thing that we should talk about is why incline presses aren't good for the chest.
Okay.
And when I say aren't good for the chest, again, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work the chest at all. It just works it minimally. And the reason is because all muscles pull toward their origin, right? So this is undeniable. If I give you one end of the rope and I tie the other end to something, let's just say you're the middle chest. You're holding on to that muscle fiber. And there's a heavy box over there. And I'm standing on the guy's chin, right? Let's say you're standing on the upper end, the top part of his sternum, right? And on the other end is the arm. You're going to pull that arm toward you.
Right.
I can't pull from the chin. There's no pectoral muscle on the chin. All right. Well, when you're doing an incline, you're moving toward the chin. You're not moving toward the highest part on the sternum. If you were, you'd be doing a flat press.
And right now, Doug's doing a movement kind of coming across his body and going like kind of even with his eyes. And if you do that movement, you'll notice it's kind of hard to actually flex your pecs that way.
Impossible.
If you think about like when you get up off of doing some maybe flat dumbbell presses or whatever exercise, your flies or whatever, when you get done and you go to do like a chest pose, you normally are pushing your hands together.
Your hands are always lower than your clavicle.
Right.
If I say flex your chest as hard as you can, you're not going to do this.
Like, I'm trying to push both my hands together with my hands up high.
And you actually can't.
It doesn't feel like there's much there. Yeah.
And let me also say that this is not a deniable thing. This is an absolute fact. We evolved from quadrupeds, even though some religious people out there might argue with that. We evolved. We evolved from quadrupeds. And we became primates, which meant we started moving arms progressively downward. But we never, ever evolved to push our arms progressively upward in an incline angle or even an overhead. One of my endorsers of my book is a paleoanthropologist, and he corroborated that. And he goes, yeah, there was never, basically they're forensic scientists. They look at the skeleton, they look at the musculature, and they say, what did this joint evolve to do? And then they connect the dots and they go, well, they had to forage and they had to do this. And so never did we ever have to do an incline angle. So the idea that we would be moving our arms in an upward direction would only make sense if our arms were connected to our torso halfway between the highest and the lowest part of the pecs. But they're not. They're connected to the top part of the pecs.
So I've heard a lot of people talk about building the upper chest shelf or whatever it is. Can you even build a different part of your I don't even understand what that means. Well,
okay, obviously, if you talk to an anatomist or a paleoanthropologist or an orthopedic doctor, they would say shelf.
Right.
Shelf. We're talking fibers. We're talking sternal fibers, the highest sternal fibers on the sternum. And then we're talking about the inner part of the clavicle right here.
That feels good, Doug.
has the clavicular.
Hey.
Easy boy, easy.
There's strong hands over here.
Has the clavicular pectorals, right? So again, all muscles pull toward their origin. So if you move your arm toward the upper inner part of the clavicle, you're going to get more pectoral, more of that. But when you do this, that clavicle shifts over. So you're still moving toward the clavicular pectoral when you're doing a flat dumbbell press. In my book, I have a picture of a super lean woman, and you can actually see her clavicle shift over. You can see her humerus move toward the clavicle, toward the clavicular fibers, more so than even the highest sternal fibers. So when you're doing, look, I don't even do a flat press because even a flat is too few fibers. Once you get into a slight decline or a more extreme decline, you're moving toward a greater number of pectoral fibers. So you're naturally activating more parts of the pec. So we had one guy send us a picture of massive upper pec. He said, I never had this when I was doing inclines. I got that doing declines.
Yeah. What about cable flies then?
Well, cable flies, when you're talking about cables, you're talking about a different direction of resistance than gravity, which is just straight down. So if you're doing a cable fly, obviously there's a lot of variables here. What angle are you at relative to the cables, right? So one thing I think is so funny when we're talking about cables is, again, cables, you choose a direction of resistance, right? When you're doing free weight, you have to angle your body relative to it, right? So if you see someone doing a bent over tricep kickback with cables, they're just doing a push down, right? They change their body position, but they also change the direction of resistance. So when you see someone doing, let's say, a decline bench, cable fly, I say, why would you put a decline bench there? Why don't you just sit upright, put the cables a little higher and go in a decline direction? You don't have to, the bench doesn't matter. Once you've got pulleys, you can do whatever you want to do with your torso.
Could we just put a couple of mats maybe underneath like a part of the bench press to make it like a decline, or does it need to be declined pretty aggressively?
You can tilt. You can take a flat
Just
bench
a
and put a
couple
box
inches.
underneath. Yeah. Now, getting back to your question, why is it not so commonly used? In part, it's because people don't understand the value of it, but also in part because it's kind of hard to get in and out of that thing.
Yeah.
Right. So if you tip a bench up and you have no place for your ankles, you might fall back. You might have, right? So what we do is we have a couple of steps that we put on either side. We put the weight on there. That way you don't have to come back with the weight or sit up with the weight, right? You get into your decline bench, you hook your ankles, you lie back, you pick up one, you pick up the other, you do your set, you put that one down, this one down, you're done. Easy. But unless you have that setup, you're going to feel it's cumbersome, and you're going to say, oh, the hell, I'm going to do an incline because it's easier to get out of.
Yes.
Sometimes people don't feel that this is important, but I think it's important to point out Doug is jacked. He's in good shape, and I always think that is relevant. You know, a lot of times we'll hear from some people that
Look at that.
aren't very well built, who are preaching stuff,
I'm
but
61.
they're not following the protocols, and it obviously is working for you and a lot of the people that you've helped.
Yeah. Well, again, I wish I would have discovered this stuff a long time ago. I mean, I train exclusively with this now, and I get great workouts, as good as a 61-year-old can.
Any injuries?
I have an old, funny left shoulder from overhead pressing years ago. I had a knee surgery. I popped an Achilles or a patella tendon running in the rain. I slipped and fell in the rain, so it wasn't through training. It's 95% good. I can't quite train as well with my left leg as I can with my right leg, but and my calves, somewhere along the way, this is kind of a bizarre thing. My inner head of both calves somehow tore. But you think of a tear as being like a sudden thing. This wasn't the case. Somewhere along the way, maybe one fiber here, one fiber there, little by little. So now if you look at my calves, you see that.
Yep.
Whoa.
Yeah, the same thing happened to my tricep.
It's just a weird thing.
It just tore. I don't even remember it.
It didn't happen in a way that you noticed it.
Right.
So, Doug, I'm actually curious. How long have you been training with this specific Brig 20 movements? Because, like you said, you realized how important physics was to lifting when you were 16. But in terms of developing this and then making it your primary training style, how long have you been doing that for yourself in your bodybuilding career?
It wasn't a switch over. It wasn't like on this date. No, because it was a gradual discovery along the way. So, for example, let's just say I discovered that the middle trapezius does not connect to the arms. You go, oh, look at that. It starts in the middle of the spine. It goes to the outer edge of the shoulder blades. And so when you're doing a rowing thing, the arm part of that has nothing to do with your middle trapezius. And yet, without knowing it, you're doing it for the upper back. Mm-hmm. The biggest muscle of the upper back is the middle trapezius, right? So unless you're rowing and pulling your shoulders back, you're not getting maximum. So then you go, okay, well then maximum trapezius involvement would be pretty much only scapular retraction. I don't even need to move my arms, although I can.
Yeah.
And if I do, I get starting to work some of the highest lat fibers also. And the resistance is coming from an angle laterally, both sides. But I was still doing T-bar row because, like everyone else, I had an emotional attachment, kind of a hard time believing that it didn't. But the more I did it, the more I realized every time I do that T-bar row, I feel it in my rear deltoids. I don't feel it, but every time I do this, I feel middle trapezius and no rear deltoids. I'm not trying to work rear deltoids with this thing. I'm trying to work middle trapezius.
Maybe if you were to do something like a T-bar row, you have the rear delts in mind and you use a lighter weight and you are trying to pay attention to the rear delt rather than
that isn't
right?
a bad rear deltoid exercise. Right. It's not the best, but it's a very good one. And so to answer your question, it slowly evolved so that I finally evolved exclusively to the Brig 20 probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay. And this also makes me, a really cool thing I like about, first off, the Brig 20 and the things you've developed in the book is that if the individual's intention is to load the muscle as much as possible, a lot of, actually almost all of these movements, they're very easy to do no matter if you are a new lifter or if you're someone who is older, right? Because, I mean, squats are great. I love squats. I want to be squatting until I'm 80, 90 years old. I probably won't be squatting as much, but I want to be able to have the ability to, right? Mm-hmm. But if someone doesn't have that ability or they don't like it, yeah. Right? Doing something like a sissy squat, no load on your spine, no load on your back. It's quads, and yeah, you get some knee flexion out of it. But if you can develop that knee flexion, it's going to be good for your knees.
Yeah.
Right. So it's less stress, and you could still get a higher effect, which is really good for longevity.
You know, there are a lot of people. Someone asked me earlier. They said, you know, do you think that more older people are using your methods? And I would say that's probably true. But it's probably true for a very specific reason, and that is that older people have either already gotten injured, or older people are more in tune to what feels natural and what doesn't feel natural. So they're more receptive, right? Whereas you get a guy who's 20 years old and all he wants to do is show off in the gym, he's not going to be receptive. He wants to do his, over the chinning bar, right? So he wants people to go. He wants to do the triple jumping rope. He wants to jump up on the 4 foot, 5 foot. Do we know anyone who? No, I mean, we know that there's a part of the male personality that says, "Hey, you can't be the only person who does it. I can do that too."
Yes.
Right. So we feel challenged when we see someone do something that we think, well, I can probably do that too. Mm-hmm. But that's not it. Well, for me, it's not the point. And if it is the point for you, then you need to be able to separate what is muscle building and what is athletic or achievement or, stunt.
I think sometimes, older folks may have been told by somebody that it would be a great idea for them to go to the gym and work on getting some resistance training to build some muscle mass, because it can help them in their later years. The stronger that they are going into whatever things they're about to face, the better off they're going to be. And so I don't think they care in terms of what they just want to know, what's best, what's most efficient. And if you can get them to do some exercises that are efficient and that don't hurt, I think they'd be all in. I think they'd be like, this is great. I get to do exercise that isn't super painful, that is challenging, but yet fun. And, they're not going to get hurt.
Right. Weight bearing is important, but the question is, how much weight bearing is too much? Mm-hmm. I do shrugs with cables. I could with dumbbells too, but I don't like the dumbbells rubbing against my legs. So you can do, 80-pound shrugs, 80 pounds on each side, and that's pushing down on your spine. With 160 pounds, it's pulling down on your shoulder carriage, right? But it's not on your spine, and it's not 300 or 400 pounds. So I'm not getting no spinal loading. I'm not getting no weight bearing. I'm just getting a more efficient version of it so that I'm getting maximum muscle loading with what I'm doing.
What about things like farmer's carries, like any sort of weighted carry? I know Stan Efferding's a big proponent of it, just to get people to have, a load bearing exercise. Those are easy exercises for anybody to incorporate. Even something like a rack deadlift can be safe and can be fairly easy to learn. What are your thoughts on those exercises?
Well, let's just take the farmer carry. So let's just say you're holding a pair of 50-pound dumbbells and you're walking. Now compare that to holding a pair of 50-pound dumbbells and shrugging. Okay, the same downward pushing on the spine, on the hips, right? Now, when you're walking, you're shifting the weight from the left side to the right side, so there's a little bit of coordination that's going on there. And some people really tout that as the real value of the farmer carry. And some people say, hey, I built my traps doing it. Well, yeah, because it's kind of an isometric shrug, right? You'd get better trap development with a dynamic shrug. So just do the whole thing, right? So, but if you look at the forearms and the upper arms, they're vertical. The lower legs are mostly vertical. The femurs are mostly vertical. Vertical limbs are neutral, right? So that means they're loading their corresponding muscle with the smallest possible percentage of the weight you're using. Now, people can tear a bicep doing a deadlift, even though that forearm is mostly vertical, right? But if you take the amount of weight that's being deadlifted times the 12-to-1 ratio magnifier of the forearm, even a 2% angle is going to overload the bicep tendon, and that's why that's up. So you don't need, too much a percentage from the vertical position to load a muscle. You can feel it in your deltoids if you're carrying 50-pound dumbbells, even with like a 10-degree angle to your arms. But is that the most efficient way to load the deltoids? No. A more efficient way would be less weight, full range of motion. So every muscle that's participating in a farmer carry can be worked better, fuller range of motion with less weight, more muscle load with a different exercise. So is it a worthless exercise? No. There's some worth to it, but it's compromised, especially when you compare it to other alternatives.
I think actually the traps are a muscle group that all guys want to be able to build, and many people are.
You're lucky.
Sorry.
You son of a bitch.
I'm sorry.
Oh, son of a bitch.
Let's talk about the traps though. How, for individuals who find it very hard to grow traps, some people wrestled and their traps are just like this, just with no weight training, right?
Yeah.
But being a muscle group like that, what are the best ways for individuals to get the most out of their genetic potential for trap muscle gain? Well,
look, I remember when I was growing up, I was 16, 17 years old at Bill Pearl's gym. And there was this one guy that had massive traps, and he said, what did you do? He goes, I did upright rows.
Okay.
Well, upright rows has an incidental shrugging component to it. It's not the primary thing. It's an incidental. The arm movement is the more primary, and incidentally, okay, so therefore, if you get that kind of growth with an incidental shrug, you'd get more growth, or at least as much, with a deliberate shrug, right? So all you can do is say, what are the components of an ideal exercise? Full range of motion, opposite position loading, early phase loading if that's available, right? So if you do a full range shrug with dumbbells or barbells, that's the best you can do. And if you don't grow from that, it's not because you're not doing something right. It's just because, look, my traps were always thin. I'm ectomorphic. Frank Zane never had big traps, right? You look at some traps that are convex, and then you see some that are concave. Well, Frank Zane had concave calves, just like I do. I had good arms, I had good legs, but I didn't have good traps. So it's nothing you can do about it. All you can do is optimize the chances of that muscle growing by doing everything possibly good, possibly correct, and then let that and your genetics take over.
What are some stupid exercises? Can we just
real stupid?
I know that you don't like to fry, what other people are doing necessarily, but what are some exercises where you're like, you know what, there's really just, I know you mentioned flat bench press and incline bench press. Are there some exercises where you're just there's not a lot of great reasons for people to do some of these exercises?
Well, getting back to degrees of good and degrees of bad, right? So when you say a stupid exercise, you mean one that's got a high degree of bad, right?
It's a 1 on that scale.
Yeah. So if you were going to look at a bench press from the perspective of pectoral development, you would say it's not as good as a flat dumbbell press, because a flat dumbbell press requires you to pull the arms toward the center, whereas a bench press, you're actually pushing laterally outwards, right? So you're not coming toward as much. So an incline version is a farther departure from ideal, right? But I would say things that are one-legged, like if a guy's doing a one-legged overhead press, you know, the overhead press is already not so productive and potentially impinging the shoulder, and you're now doing it on one leg. And of course, we've all seen that guy that was doing a squat on a Swiss ball, right? And of course, he fell, and I don't think he hurt himself, but he could have, right? And if he had, it could have been serious, right? He could have, you know, taken his knee and gone back the other way with it, right? He could have done anything with it. And then you say, okay, well, that's the risk. What's the upside? Well, not much. The more unstable an exercise is, the less you're able to use significant weight. And the better, the less good you can contract against. Like if you're trying to do a pre-chair curl, not that you should do it without the bench behind it, right? Braces and supports are essential for a maximum muscle overloading. So I would say anything that's really unstable is really silly.
What about the complete opposite, like some of the machines where you're on basically a track and you have nowhere else to go? So since that's the complete opposite, does that mean that they're good?
I wouldn't say that's good, although stability is generally a good thing. You know, sometimes, like the reason why I like dumbbell presses is because you do have to sort of coordinate that movement, right? If I had a machine that just allowed me to do one thing, you know, I'm going to get some pectoral stimulation, but I'm not going to enjoy it as much, and I'm probably not going to get as much athleticism and coordination from it as I would if I was using independent dumbbells. You heard what we were saying. We responded to that thing, which non-Brig 20 exercises would be better for sports. And I said, well, you know, a barbell squats is not part of the Brig 20, but would be a good athletic exercise if you're a football player or a basketball player and you're simulating things like that, right? But a barbell bench press wouldn't be, because life isn't a barbell. If you're on the football field, you're better off training with dumbbells than you are with a barbell, because you're not going to hit a bar out there. You're going to hit individual people. So that's why you can't lump all of it together. You can't say all compounds are good or bad, or all oxidations are good or bad. It all depends on, everything has its own biomechanical profile.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, because it was along the lines of something you mentioned in that video, actually, and this is for everybody here. Do you think that doing some of the more isolated movements, maybe even some of the Brig 20 movements, we're missing out on some of the mental stuff that we could be gaining? As far as, like, you know, some people, like myself included, will say, like, we're really not as happy, or we're not the same person unless we go lift. And some of that is looking at a bar loaded with a couple of plates and being like, I'm going to squat that and I'm going to get through it, and you accomplish it. And then you're like, dude, fuck yeah. Like the rest of my day is going to be easy now. So do you think with some of these ISO movements, we're missing out on some of that aspect of lifting heavy?
I jumped out of an airplane once.
That's not a good idea. Did you have a parachute?
I had a parachute.
Oh, okay, shit, that's close.
And then same thing, when I got on the ground, I said, fuck, man, look what I did. And I saw the other people, you could barely see them jumping out of the next plane, and you go, I can conquer the world, right? Same thing, right? If you squat 500 pounds, you go, I can conquer the world. Well, you know, I can understand that feeling, but that is separate from the actual muscle loading. Now, if you're talking about doing a squat for the sake of gaining the athletic coordination that requires you to do that so that you can simulate that on the football field, that's a real thing. That's a benefit. And there's no doubt about that.
Got it.
Even though you're getting less quadricep loading and glute loading than you could otherwise get with other exercises. But the idea that you're going to do something for the macho gratification, and I'm not going to discount that, because people do what they do for their own reasons. But it's important to identify it for what it is and not think, the reason I'm doing this is because it's the best muscle building exercise. That's a different thing.
Sorry, just in regards to lifting heavy and stuff, we had an amazing question on the live chat. And if you guys are watching, please hit that like button if you guys love the info that we're hearing from Doug Brignole today. But from Dill Man, it's a funny name. He's just asking, and this is funny because like we just got our bone density scanned and stuff, and Nsima, of course, is like
off the chart.
He's a mutant. Ryan Soper, you'll meet him in a little bit. He's been powerlifting for many years. Same thing. He's got crazy bone density. I haven't been lifting too heavy for that long. I had the least bone density out of the three of us, but still pretty good. But Dill was asking about building bone density if you're not necessarily going heavy as far as like the weights go. Do your bones, I know your muscles won't care. Will your bones care if you're not lifting a heavy number versus like the resistance? You know what I mean? Like, so like if your levers are doing all the work and it's hard, but do your bones care if you're not like doing a heavy farmer's carry? Like, does that matter?
Well, here's the thing is, let's just say I'm doing a cable sissy squat and I've got 50 pounds on each stack or 100 pounds on one stack. That is, a third of what I might squat with a barbell. So you'd say I've got a third less bone stress. Is that third less bone stress going to result in significantly less bone density than 3 times? Or better yet, if I do it 3, would I get significantly more bone density? I think, and I can't answer that because that's sort of an orthopedic doctor question, right? I would guess not. I don't think that 3 times more load automatically gives you 3 times more bone density. I think maybe 10%, 20%, maybe 30% more bone density, but not 200% or 300% more bone density. And what's the upper limit of that? So at what point does it start becoming not only damaging to the bone itself, but to the stuff in between the bones, the intervertebral discs? And knowing that the spine is curved, right? Not from the front, but from the side, that's essentially a type of accordion, right? So you push down on that and you can expect the curves to come out a little farther. And when they do, that means those discs are going to do this, close in on one side and open up on the other side, potentially pushing out an intervertebral disc. So when you squat heavy, you know how important it is to maintain perfect form, to keep your back arched, right? You don't want that thing to go like this, especially at the worst possible time, right? Boom. But even if with perfect form, the question is, am I doing this? Am I really doing this for bone density?
Your genetics play a huge role in it too. Your ethnicity matters a lot. I lifted a lot of heavy weights, during my powerlifting career, and I think my bone density was like 3 or 4 or something. I think, but yours was like 7 or something like that,
7.2.
Right? Yeah, and there's African Americans have much higher bone density. So, your genetic potential on anything, like you were mentioning, the traps or bone density or any of these things, it matters a lot. And
by the way, I wonder, I'm just thinking, bone density has to do with calcium and vitamin D3. And you know that black skin does something with D3, the sunlight, that white skin doesn't. That's the reason why.
We can stay apparently out there longer.
Yeah, apparently we were not getting enough D3, so our skin lightened up to allow more D3 to be absorbed. So maybe that's the reason, even from an evolutionary standpoint, how it is that, there's a difference in bone density from ethnicity.
Right.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing to research if you were curious about it. But yeah, obviously genetics and the activity that you do. But, I don't, as I said, I do my shrugs with, 80 pounds per side. That's 160 pounds of spine loading. I'm doing, 100 pound sissy squats. I think I'm getting enough loading to get the bone density basics. Am I ultra bone dense? Probably not, but probably
very bone dense.
Bone dense enough to not be at risk of falling and breaking a hip or something.
I like what you're saying, in a lot of your message seems to be almost like a life message here. There's people they have conflated and confused ideas about the success that they're getting and the result that it may give them towards their goal. And so I think, somebody goes in and benches 315 or they squat 405, they're super excited, super pumped. That's their marker. That's their way of checking their progress. So they're super excited about it. They previously squatted 365 and previously benched 275. And so they have these markers of success. They're like, I'm becoming more successful, and therefore my improvement on the bench press is going to lead to my chest being bigger. My improvement on the squat is going to lead to my quads being bigger. But we've seen this time and time again in powerlifting where the results vary a lot depending, again, on someone's genetics. But we've seen Stan Efferding squat 900 pounds, and he didn't have like huge quads. So I think people need to kind of work their way backwards from their goal and work their way backwards from what is the end result that you're looking for, and then start to pile up a bunch of stuff that allows you to head in that direction with the least amount of resistance from each day, not resistance from the gym, but the least amount of resistance in terms of how you get some of these things done. and that is the most efficient and the most fun. You got to kind of mix all those things, marry all those things together, and you'll have a great recipe towards getting to where you want to go.
Well, here's the thing is, as you said, there is no direct correlation between strength and size. So someone asked me, when was I the biggest? I said 1991, age 31. Was that when you were the strongest? No, I hit my strength peak like in my late 20s. In fact, I might have been lifting less heavy at 31 and still being bigger, right? So there isn't a direct correlation. And that's because, of course, muscle also grows on intensity of training, intensity of fatigue and all that. So we're not talking about a 1 rep max. That's not going to build the most amount of muscle. You're going to get better with, sets of 6 and sets of 8, right? But that's not going to build the most strength. You're going to probably get better strength with 3s and 4s. So there isn't a correlation there, but the problem is that people want to have a marker, as you said. They want to say, what's the proof that I'm moving closer to my goal? And it's easy enough to say, well, my squat is this and my bench press is that. It's easy enough. It's simplified, right? Except that it doesn't work, right? And by the way, neither does body weight, right? I've been heavier and look smaller. Mm-hmm. I've been smaller. I mean, when I won Mr. California, I only weighed 184. But I looked huge.
184 is good for your height, too,
and I was ripped. Yeah. And I was ripped. So, so create the illusion, right? So, I mean, I was 205 and didn't look as good as I did at 196. So, and I saw somebody post, they were weighing 247 pounds and their goal was to hit 250 in 3 weeks. And I thought, okay, well, this is not a judgment. This is no judgment, but it's like, you're already overweight. Mm-hmm. You're not lean. Mm-hmm. So what is 250? What is it that, oh, those are my worst pictures.
He said those are your worst.
No, well, actually the picture on the right there, that was age 50 or 51, I think. But that one right there, that one over there on the left, that's 54 years old right there. Yeah. Anyway, so that's the point. That's the point is that, we look for markers that's either a body weight marker or a amount of weight lifted marker, and they're both very imprecise in terms of telling us how good we are. If you're 247 and you're really overweight, gaining 3 more pounds is the wrong direction, I would argue. Right? You're chasing something. I mean, by the way, what are the odds that you're going to gain a pound of muscle a week in the next 3 weeks? Mm-hmm. Right? So it's not, if you do gain 3 more pounds, it's not going to be muscle if it's any of it is muscle. And why are you chasing that goal? Isn't that not a really wise goal? Shouldn't you just be trying to, focus? But this is where it's arbitrary. How do you say, I want to gain only lean muscle while I'm taking fat away and the scale isn't changing? You can't tell whether you're making any progress other than pictures or maybe an observer who knows.
From a body transformation standpoint, what does cardiovascular training do for us?
Well, I think that cardiovascular training doesn't do much for fat loss. And we've seen lots of experts. Calorie burning is calorie burning, mm-hmm. right? So and every time that we burn calories, we burn a mix of carbohydrate and fat, right? So if you do cardio, it's a higher percentage of fat and a lower percentage of glucose. And if you're doing weight training, it's a higher percentage of glucose, glycogen, and a lower percent. But I've tried it both ways. I get less lean when I do cardio. And the reason I get less lean is because I'm ectomorphic. Mm. And as soon as I start introducing endurance exercise, my body takes to it very well and learns how to start conserving fuel. So I might start off on a stationary bike at 120 beats a minute heart rate. And at that same intensity level, a month later, I'll be at 90. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? So something's happening, right? I'm getting more fit. If I was a car, I'd be going from an 8-cylinder motor to a 4-cylinder motor, learning how to become more fuel efficient. I don't want to be fuel efficient. I want to be fuel inefficient, right? So you will be more fuel inefficient if you focus on resistance exercise and you spend your calorie burning like that, and then you obviously modify the diet. Now, cardiovascular exercise has huge health components. Pushes down your LDL, pushes up your HDL, and reduces your cardiovascular risk factor, increases your lung capacity, helps you go on a hike with your girlfriend so you don't make a fool of yourself when you get all this muscle, but you can't survive an hour of hiking.
Doug, I have a question. So we can come back to cardio, but I want to go back real quick to strength and size and what you mentioned about like there not being necessarily a correlation with. Can you say that again? With
between muscle size and muscle strength.
Muscle size and muscle strength. So my question is this, because you've heard of the idea of people doing like power building, right? Where they have big compounds that they work with over time, and then they also have accessory movements, smaller movements that are focused more on that specific muscle group. Now, what I noticed, and this could be just me totally, but what I noticed through my training through the years is that a lot of the beginning years of my training, I didn't really do a lot of compounds. I worked with a lot of dumbbells, cables, etc., and I got to a pretty big place without. And I started adding in things like Pendlay rows, more barbell movements. And because with the barbell movements, yes, more muscles are involved. But over time, if you are focusing on strength gain, and let's say that you're not everything is an RPE 10, right? So it's not like you're training at the edge all the time, but you are slowly increasing strength and increasing the amount of volume you're moving with these movements over time. I noticed that actually had a positive benefit to my isolation work, in the fact that my isolation work started getting stronger at a faster pace. Like, for example, a dumbbell row, after a certain point in time, those 5-pound increments, you're going to be chasing those small amounts of volume. Okay, I can move 12 reps this week, and next week I can move 13 with 80, 85, whatever. But as I started getting stronger with these big compounds, those movements also started gaining, I could move more volume with those movements over time too, faster. So I'm wondering, like, this is totally anecdotal, of course, but seeing how that worked in synergy with me being able to now move more training volume, and in essence, if I'm able to move more training volume, I'm able to get bigger, it kind of makes me wonder, is there really no like synergistic benefit of strength and size, especially for an athlete who isn't enhanced?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question.
Yeah,
it's a good question. And as I always say, if someone has a belief that something worked,
okay, yeah,
we have to find the mechanism. We have to identify the why. We can't just say, well, it makes no sense, but that's okay. Right? We have to say, oh, that's because. Okay, so what I would say is that a muscle does what a muscle does. Mm-hmm. A muscle's got a job. It's going to flex or extend that joint right there, and that's all it does. And when a muscle participates in a compound movement, it's only doing its job. It doesn't know or care what everybody else is doing. So if you were to analyze the amount of involvement of that particular muscle as a participant in that compound movement, you could actually quantify based on how much weight is being moved, based on the angle of the limbs being involved and all that. You can quantify how much load that muscle is getting, and then you can compare that to the amount of load that muscle would get in an isolated exercise or in a particular isolated exercise. And so if you were to find that the participation in a compound movement is less loaded, mm-hmm. then it makes no sense as to why that muscle would get bigger. So the only thing I would say is that maybe the exercise that you thought was isolated wasn't so isolated after all. Mm. And maybe there were some peripherally recruited muscles that are happening that weren't getting worked in that isolation exercise that are over here. And now they're assisting over here. So that's theoretical. That's sort of like, but again,
that makes sense.
You'd have to figure out the mechanics. You'd have to be able to say, just like an engineer, right? If you were building a bridge or a crane or a building, you'd have to know where all the forces were and account for all of them. You can't have something be mysterious, right? You have to know where they all are and why they're there. So if that is true, then we'd have to figure out why, and then we could analyze it on an exercise by exercise basis rather than in general categories. But I would say that there might also have been some other things happening in your life, that maybe you were increasing your protein at the time, or maybe you were a little older and your body was entering a different endocrine phase or something else, or maybe you were just more focused and sleeping more, and so we'd have to make sure that we're talking apples and apples, that everything else was constant.
Yeah.
And the only thing that was different was this method of training. And then we could say, okay, well, then let's look at the mechanics of each exercise and figure out what's going on.
Gotcha.
You just tried to spit COVID at me.
I did. Damn.
You almost got me.
I'm trying to get you out of the game.
I moved my elbow quick enough to avoid any potential danger.
Matrix that shit.
So men typically have a little bit better, like neurological efficiency when it comes to being able to tap into like their nervous system to be able to lift more weight. To kind of play devil's advocate off of what you said, a lot of times females perform better with higher reps, and they can normally do higher reps that are closer to the 1 rep max. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they're in a lot of circumstances, neurologically inefficient. How does the central nervous system play into all this? Because men are certainly a lot bigger than women, and they have a propensity to be quite a bit stronger than women in a lot of cases.
And yet still sometimes women outlift them.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting. You know, I have to say I don't know about that. I mean, I know about the neurological triggers that compromise an exercise, like reciprocal innervation and bilateral deficit, active insufficiency. But there might be something else that's going on neurologically that I'm not aware of. I would say that you said something about men are more neurologically efficient. So maybe what happens is their muscle contracts harder and fatigues sooner because of that. Whereas a woman can't get as much contraction. Jessica told us earlier that she wasn't getting as much bicep contraction on some exercise until she started using elastic bands. So again, I would say that, there's probably a difference in the way a male muscle contracts and fatigues versus the way a woman's muscle doesn't contract and doesn't fatigue that maybe allows her to lift a slightly heavier weight. I don't know. That's off the top of my head.
Kind of playing off of like what Nsima's mentioning is the fact that, potentially by building yourself up to be stronger in some of these basic exercises, maybe you are tapping into the central nervous system, and maybe you're just gaining more access to being able to put on more muscle mass over a period of time.
Maybe it is a neurological thing. Maybe you're just connecting better.
Much like you may do with your fitness. Like if I have really poor fitness and I go through a workout with you and I can't keep up, I can't really do the sets and the reps and the different things that you're doing, it's going to be hard for me to get a similar stimulus. But if my fitness level is brought up, if I get more accustomed, if I have a little bit better conditioning, I know we just recently talked about cardio, how it's maybe not the best thing for aesthetics, but again, maybe having a higher fitness level can just give us more access to be able to have more different variation in our fitness or in our strength training.
Well, I will say that my experience is opposite your experience. My experience was when I went from isolation exercises to adding an occasional compound exercise, I felt less good about it. I felt like I was getting less of anything really from the compound, it was more general, more broad, but less specific to any one participant. And then it didn't help my isolation exercise any better. So I kept gravitating back toward the isolation. I just from a testimony standpoint, the isolation exercise that I have done, my experience has been very gratifying from a muscle growth, a muscle stimulation, a muscle pump feeling, while simultaneously allowing my joints to feel better than ever before. No joint strain, no elbow strain, shoulder strain, back strain, etc. And so I would have a hard time in my training justifying trying to add compound movements with heavier weight because I felt like it was moving farther away from. But that's because I've never cared about how much I lifted. I've only cared about how I feel and how I look.
What do you think would happen if you utilize some compound movements? Like, let's just say you started deadlifting every other week and you just used weights that you could keep good form with, and you still didn't care about how much weight you moved. Do you think they would have much benefit to you?
I do think that the deadlift with semi-straight knees does activate the hamstrings in a way that nothing else quite does. And the reason I say that is because you could possibly get something similar if you did that glute machine with a relatively straight knee. But typically we don't. We have the knee bent here and bent back there, right? So if you straighten that knee, you would get hamstring elongation while it's hip extending.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you're also not applying the force at the end of the tibia. So I do feel, and every once in a while I do some semi-straight leg deadlifts, either with body weight or just, 20 or 30 pound dumbbells, just because I feel something in my hamstrings that I don't otherwise feel. And I kind of like it from a functional standpoint. I don't think it's going to make my hamstrings look any better, but I do feel that's probably a semi-necessary function to maintain. But having said that, I would never do, a 200 pound or a 300 pound deadlift to get that feeling, because I can get it with so much less.
I'm curious now, since we're on the topic of hamstrings, a movement that I've been adding in a lot recently has been Nordic hamstring curls. And I haven't been doing that for hamstring hypertrophy. It was more so because I do a lot of athletic work, and Nordic hamstring curls have been researched. And when you get good at them, to actually decrease hamstring injury risk. I've noticed that I've been able to sprint with that. I've in the past, I sprinted once a long time ago, and it was like, I pulled my hamstring.
Did you really?
Yeah, it was like a year and a half ago, but I was like, let me see if I can still sprint, because I played soccer. And then the first sprint I did, he was just like, peace out, bro. I'm out for a few months. Yeah. So my hamstring pulled, and I've been sprinting recently, and my hamstrings have been feeling great. Like, that's not even close to happening. I feel bulletproof. But from the physics aspect of the Nordic hamstring curl, can you kind of explain that? Because it's difficult for a lot of people to progress.
Sure. No, I know what it looks like.
You know what it looks like, yeah.
So here's what it is. It's obviously your torso is getting horizontal as the hamstring is elongating, as the knee is opening, right? That means it's early phase loaded, late phase unloaded. You don't even get to the 90-degree bend and you're already at zero.
Yeah.
And you certainly don't keep going, right? So you don't get, full contraction of the hamstring. So you're working the basically stretch phase, and you're working it with one weight, body weight. Now you can add weight, but you can't really subtract weight. So what happens when you run? What happens when you sprint? When you sprint, you're loading that early phase, right? Your foot is landing when your knee is almost straight. Yeah. Boom, you're loading it with full body weight and momentum. Right. And so that would be the reason why there's a decreased injury rate, is because you're strengthening it at its most vulnerable place.
Are there any other movements other than the Nordic hamstring curl that could be very beneficial in working the hamstring at that phase?
Well, I suppose you could do a seated leg curl and focus only on the first quarter of the range of motion.
Okay. So, and there are some prime machines that you can actually focus on loading that range higher.
You could also do a TRX on your back, where you put your heels on there.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with that, again, like this, is that you're using body weight. So you can do the math on it. Let's just say, to make numbers easy, you weigh 200 pounds. Since most of your weight is going to be on your shoulders, let's just say a third of it is going to be in your heels and 2/3 is on your shoulders. So a third of 200 pounds is whatever, 80 something. And then you're going to magnify that times the length of the lower leg. Right, and the hamstring is pulling on the tibia mostly parallel to it, which is a mechanical disadvantage. In the book, I actually did the math on it, and you could see that each of your hamstrings are loaded with about 2,000 pounds of force when your knee is straight, and then some people do it with one leg at a time. So we're talking 4,500 pounds. And if the hamstring doesn't hold, boom, there go your tendons with your knee trying to go the other direction. Yeah. So, the Nordic version, you can stop short of full extension if you want. You can feel your way through that. And if you're not strong enough to go all the way to the bottom, then you stop soon enough. But I would still say, as is always the case, that, whenever you have mechanical disadvantage, like in a preacher curl.
Yeah.
When your arm is almost straight and your bicep is pulling mostly parallel, you have 8 or 9 times more force requirement of that tendon. So I have had someone say to me they tore their knee, their hamstring tendon, by doing a one-legged TRX. And the numbers explain why.
Yeah. Now, I have a question for you too. As far as strengthening tendons, could a preacher curl, with the amount of pressure done there, if someone uses it in a smart fashion, because people have torn their biceps on preacher curls, right? Frequently, going too heavy. Yeah. But is there a benefit there if a person uses appropriate load for that tendon in terms of strengthening the tendon over time?
I've never seen any research that shows tendons getting stronger.
Okay.
Because of resistance. Just like, yes, bone density does increase and muscles do increase, but I've never seen anything saying that tendons or ligaments increase significantly. Maybe they increase their thickness a tiny bit over time, assuming they weren't overwhelmed along the way. It was gradual,
gradual.
Right? Instead of a sunburn, you get a little bit of suntan along the way, right? So too much is always bad, but a little bit over time could cause some strengthening. But I've never read anything where it says it's a significant tendon. And then you'd have to say why, right? When I can get all that I want from bicep development from doing, a regular vertical standing dumbbell curl. Now you might say, yeah, but if I'm grappling, I'm at risk. If they're trying to give me an arm bar, I need to be able to pull out of the arm. All right, well then you've got a reason why it might be worth trying to do that. But if that's not something that you're going to be challenged with on a regular basis, I would say just avoid the risk.
And this is really cool, and I'm going to be done after this. But this is why, I've been really loving the work from ATG and Ben Patrick and those guys, because they do a lot of work in those really deep positions, but they're very, very careful about gradual loading over time. So they're very careful. Like, you do not progress as quickly. If you do, you'll fuck yourself up.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. But I have noticed, as I've been doing that very slowly over time, very carefully, even things like Nordics, I've been progressing it slowly. That's a very high risk injury movement. If you progress it too quickly, you could pull your hamstrings. People have done that. But by progressing it slowly, I've been able to gain levels of strength in positions that I never would have had before. And
that would explain why you have fewer hamstring injuries during a sprint if you've been doing that movement, because there is a strengthening in that vulnerable range of motion.
Yeah.
And you were talking about research, and somebody on the live chat had actually asked if there was any studies that would be able to prove that the incline is actually a little bit better than, the decline is better than a flat or an incline bench.
I think that's been done. I think they did an EMG study that actually showed more fiber activation during a decline than an incline.
Yeah. Have you found any other studies that would also support some of the other Brig 20 movements?
Look, the first thing I'll say is a lot of times people they talk about EMG studies as if the EMG study is sort of the end all. And what I always say is the EMG study is okay. It's not the end all. It can be flawed. For example, someone will say, well, the EMG study shows that, tricep kickback has high tricep activation. And I say, well, tricep activation or muscle activation isn't an on or off switch, right? There's degrees and quality of activation. So if I squeeze my hands together like this, I can get activation of my pecs. And an EMG study says, oh, that's great. Let's use that to build the pecs. Well, what about full range of motion? What about early phase loading? What about, sets and reps? What about... So there's all kinds of things that contribute to muscle growth separate from an EMG study. But oftentimes an EMG study just basically corroborates what we could easily predict if you just understand mechanics. Mechanics tells us that moving a limb in a direction where there's no muscle fibers means that muscle fiber can't possibly be very activated, right? Oh, an EMG study proved that? Great. You needed an EMG study to know that?
Yeah. Is there it's going to sound silly, but is there a Brig 20 for diet and nutrition?
Oh my gosh, no. No, not. Look, my focus has been mechanics.
Got it.
I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a biochemist. We were talking about it earlier. We were talking about just the huge discrepancy that exists between people that believe in vegan and people that believe in carnivore and everything in between, right? I have a friend that I consult with frequently, Jeff Feliciano. Some of you may know the name. He was kind of the Dan Duchesne back in the 70s and 80s. We met a long time ago when I was 17 years old. He formulated nutrition products for Weider, and he's been involved in the Muhammad Ali training school and just a lot of things. But so he's kind of a biomechanics genius. And we always exchange information and metabolical. We talk about different books and it's very, very complex when it comes to nutrition. It's very, very complex, and so to find a Brig 20 version or to find a simplified version of anything in nutrition is really hard, but I will say that I believe that neither extreme is correct.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if there's, a reason to be too extreme with your nutrition. You know, I personally have done like low carb diets and stuff like that, and I found that it was an added benefit to be, you know, zero carb. And I think, again, people are conflating, you know, information along with the results that they're trying to get. It's like, what is it you're trying to go after? What is it you're trying to, you know, what's the end result that you're looking for? And if you're looking for, you know, being as lean as possible, you know, we mentioned cardio earlier. Like sometimes some of these things that people feel are going to lead to their best results are oftentimes things that really don't make a big difference. They don't move the needle that much.
And a lot of times people don't even know how to execute something that they're supposed to be following. Like they may not be executing vegan very well or low carb very well. We were talking about some people don't even know what carbs actually are. They'll say, well, I've cut out my carbs, but I'm still eating bananas. It's like, so you just basically cut out your potatoes and rice, right? So,
there's different versions of vegan and keto, because like there's people that have keto and they have these weird keto snacks, and there's people that do vegan and they eat like vegan brownies. And it's like, I don't think that's the point in the vegan diet. I think the point of most nutritional interventions are to get you to eat whole foods that are natural from the earth. And if you do that, you're most likely be in great shape no matter how much of that shit you eat.
So I was talking to Feliciano. I wanted to give you this quote he sent me, which I think is brilliant in a way, and sort of explains how complex that subject can be. But it started off by me saying, you know, look, I saw this post where this guy is saying plants have been trying to kill us for millions of years, you know, and you know, and how could this be, right? And
Saladino.
Yep. Right. So what he said, and by the way, if you Google Saladino, you'll see some feedback from people who say, well, it's too extreme. I mean, which is what Feliciano told me. He says, look, it is true that plants do have a mechanism that discourage animals from eating them. Right? We know that. We know there's foods that are very bitter, foods that are poison, foods that have thorns, you know, so there's all kinds of things. But this is what he said to me, which I thought was pretty brilliant. He says, each type of dieting approach has its rational do's and don'ts. If fast carbs, no fats. If slow reacting limited carbs, then moderate amounts of healthful fats. If lower carbs, then higher fat and moderate protein. If very low carbs, then higher protein, but not so high as to screw up calorie balance. It's all about chronic circulating insulin and glucose levels pitched against exercise, meal portions, and macronutrient combination, resulting in endocrine response.
Can you send that to us?
Yeah.
I like that. Can you send it?
Then he says emotional stress counts significantly, of course, as does glycemic load and physical activity considerations. So that is the right answer. But how do you act on that? That is, I mean, you're asking someone to be a biochemist every day when they're preparing a meal, right? So he has told me repeatedly that the best overall is the Mediterranean approach. That's what he's told me.
Eating whole. Nutrition's not complicated.
Yeah, I mean,
we make it complicated though. Yeah.
But like you said, if you just eat natural whole foods and you avoid all the processed synthetic foods, and you eat, you know, you avoid the extremes, you know, extreme, too much protein, too much fat, too much simple sugar, you're going to be fine.
Exactly.
But I will send you that quote because it's just brilliantly complex. And I thought it was so perfect for sort of like showing anybody who just says, oh, it's that simple, just stop eating plants. Oh, it's simple, just stop eating animal products. No, it's not that simple.
Well, I saw somebody the other day that they had a shirt that said eat more plants. And I wanted to like talk to that person and say, most of the food in the grocery store is from plants, 80%.
Yeah. It started from plants.
And we're fat and we're heading in the wrong direction.
Did you read Metabolical?
I did not.
Well, so what he says in there, it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to it. Right. So everything started as a plant. Right. And then we did stuff to it. Right. We converted it into this, into that. I mean, high fructose corn syrup was just corn. Right. It was okay when it was just corn. Right. Now it's plain old sugar. Or you look at the label and it says dehydrated beet juice, which is sugar.
For your last show, what type of diet were you following?
You know, I in my 20s, I did zero fat dieting.
Oh, wow.
I did what Albert Beckles did. Chicken and rice.
Albert Beckles shredded.
Can I ask you real quick how you felt when you did that?
Terrible.
Okay.
Terrible. And there's a very good reason.
Yeah.
And that's because you're eating rice, which is high glycemic. You're spiking your insulin. your body won't release body fat with an insulin spike, and yet there's a calorie shortage. So it says, what the hell? You want me to give up some of this stored fuel, but you slammed the door. I can't get to it, right? So you feel like shit. I mean, ultimately, I got ripped because of just how low my calories were and how stressed I was and all that. But that was not the best way to go. So, but nevertheless, I pretty much stayed with the American Heart Association's recommendations, the food pyramid, which was basically carbs, bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, right? At the very top, smallest possible amount of fat, right? That's what I was doing. And I thought, I'm exercising, I'll be healthy. One day, you know, I had to get spine surgery for a herniation. So I was doing the pre-op, and the guy is a cardiologist. He says, let's just do a calcium score while you're here, because I see your father had heart disease. Yeah, great. So I had high plaque. I said, how the hell does that work? I've been eating low fat my whole life, right? So I called Jeff Feliciano, and he goes, you've been following the American Heart Association's recommendations, right? I go, yeah. He goes, first mistake. He says 80% of the cholesterol that's floating around in your body, you made. You didn't eat it. How did you make it? Insulin. What raises insulin? Carbs, starches, and more so in the absence of fat.
What about overeating? Were you overeating? I mean, I know getting ready for the shows, you were not overeating, but
no. So
were you trying to get big? And
so let me just finish this one thought. So then he said, go ahead and switch. Eliminate all your starches. Get your carbs only from vegetables and fruits. And eat as much fat as you want. Avocados, olive oil, ghee, egg yolks, red meat, salmon, coconut oil. I did that, and my cholesterol went from 290 eating low fat to 138 eating high fat, low carbs. So then I used that for my competition diet, because I realized now that I've got insulin out of the picture, I'm not going to get, let's just call it a false positive. I'm not going to get a fat retention even though I'm in a calorie shortage, right? So now it's only calories, right? So once you've got the insulin thing out of the equation, then all you have to do is just bring down your quantity, your portion sizes until you are in fat loss mode, and you feel much better because you don't have an insulin rise blocking your fat loss, and it worked just fine.
Yeah, I think nutrition can be pretty simplified. I don't think people really need a lot of carbohydrate. Eat enough fat to where your hormones aren't compromised. Eat a gram of protein per pound of body weight. And voila, you're right there. You know, maybe you might need to make sure you get some of your micronutrients and electrolytes, make sure you get enough sleep. And it could really be that simple. But people get addicted to food. You know, it's hard. People get addicted to the convenience of packaged food and things like that. And they find themselves binging on that or restricting too much and trying to be in a really low calorie in a deficit. And then they end up binging on some of those delicious foods that we all love.
Right. You know, I'm lucky in a sense. I was raised with my father left when I was 5. My mother raised us. My mother was a nurse in Chile, South America. And then all of a sudden she finds herself with a 5-year-old boy and an 8-year-old boy, no husband.
Damn.
And she spoke mostly Spanish. She's got to go to work. She starts housekeeping. So I grew up on a housekeeper's salary, you know, which was not much. He was making $3 an hour, $30 a day to raise 2 boys. And so we did not eat luxury foods. We did not eat, you know, for the sake of comfort. I mean, we ate, you know, survival mode, shake and bake, Salisbury steak. And so as a result of that, the good news is I grew up with no addiction to food whatsoever. For me, and I started working out at 14. So I'm 14 years old. I ate for one purpose: physique, health, period. I was 14 years old. I walked into the health food store and I said to the owner there, I said, teach me. Which he was tickled by. It's like, this 14-year-old kid comes and teach me, where do I start, right? I took wheat germ oil, lecithin granules, whatever, you know, because I was experimenting and exploring, but I was passionate from the time I was 4. And from that point forward, everything I've ever eaten has been for the purpose of being healthy. So I'm not addicted to anything.
You mentioned training at Bill Pearl's gym. Correct me if I'm wrong. Bill Pearl is the kind of creator of the 5 sets of 5. Am I right with that?
I don't think so. If it is true,
or maybe he made it popular. I don't know.
If it is true, that I don't know about it. You know, 4-time Mr. Universe winner. I was 15 years old, and I made a deal with him. He let me scrub his showers do janitorial work on the weekends in exchange for membership. But I was then, as I am now, a free thinker, right? So I didn't take anybody's word for anything. I wanted to explore it. So, Bill wanted me to do a lot of the compound movements, but actually he was against bench press too. But the point is that he was a great mentor, great father figure, great coach. He wrote the preface, I guess it's called, to the book, and explains how I was just a kid when I came in there, and I learned a lot on my own without his help. But
is he still alive?
He is alive. He's about 92, I think.
Oh,
now.
Wow. I think I got my bills wrong. I think Bill Starr might have been the 5'5".
Oh, that could be. That could be. By the way, I never thought that 5 of 5 or 8 of 8 or 10 of 10 or any of that made any sense, because it depends on the intensity of the set and the weight you're using.
Well, I mean, I guess I think conceptually it can make sense, because if you're working with a true 5x5 load, right, then you're probably working within like an 80% range, 70 to 80%, which if you're working with that and that's the meat.
If you're training for strength.
If you're training, but also because it's around 70%, like 70 to 80, like you're also getting hypertrophy benefits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're getting strength benefits and you're getting hypertrophy benefits.
I would almost think it'd be inverse. I would almost think it'd be either 5 sets of 10 or 10 sets of 5.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, you can sort of do it either way, but the 25 reps, anywhere between like 16 to 25 reps, based off of this chart that a guy made, this Russian coach. It's called Prilipin's chart. That's where a lot of the strength training protocols have kind of come from. 8 sets of 3, 6 sets of 4, 4 sets of 6, 5 sets of 5. 10 sets of 2, kind of all those protocols, they're all very similar in the overall amount of work that you get done. And as Nsima's pointing out, it's done in like a specific percentage, done with like proper. The problem is people use too much weight. They always use too much weight. Their 5x5 looks like they're going to die.
And I was going to end their perception of maximum effort is also not necessarily the same for everybody, right? What you perceive as maximum may be somebody else's pussy weight. But what I was going to say was, from the perspective of muscle building, which is the only perspective I've ever used. Yeah. My goal has been to seek what is considered an optimally stimulating set. And then parameters have to be assigned to that. What designates it as an optimally productive set? Mm-hmm. And then how many of those can I tolerate? And can I push the envelope? And how far can I push the envelope? So with the goal of most muscle growth. So
what do the sets and reps look like?
Well, and that's why people say how many sets and reps, and I go, it's impossible to give one pad thing, because it'll change from one person to the next, and it'll change from person 1 year to the next year, next month.
Your goals are going to be different,
and day to day. I mean, this day I might be able to handle 12 sets. Next time I might be able to handle 16 sets.
Do you just go by how you feel personally?
Yeah, you have to. You kind of have to be intuitive. And I think that's the difference between the champions and the non-champions, is the champions know how to adjust along the way. And the non-champions want a strict guideline, and they never waver from it. And the body never works that way. Every day is a little different. Yeah. If you're a pole vaulter, you'll notice that the pole vault is just a little different every time, right? Because maybe the guy, and usually these guys are very skilled, they can shift their body weight, shifting a certain direction. They know how to maneuver in. If you're a guitarist, you've seen the guy playing the guitar in the middle of the song. He tightens one string because he's not like this, right? Everything changes a little bit from one day to the next, and you have to go with it. You have to sense it and adjust with it.
I like that a lot. Something I've found to be really useful for me is when something does feel good, to really stick with it and don't worry about the sets. You mentioned doing 12 sets of something. I've had that happen many times in workout. I'm like, this feels good. I'm just going to keep rolling with this. I'm not
even going to count.
I'm not concerned about getting in X amount of exercises at that point. I'm like, this exercise feels great. I'm going to stick with this.
And that's what we should go by. We should go by the feeling. Your body is talking to you every workout, right? But instead, you're looking at what's on the paper. You're not even listening to your body, right? So I always tell people, don't ignore what your body is saying, right? This day it doesn't feel strong, go with it. That day it does feel strong, go with that. Listen to your body.
Yeah, but my trainer said this is the program that I got to follow, so I got to do that.
By the way, speaking of listening to your body and not outside parameters, I wouldn't mind it if weight machines didn't have numbers. They had letters.
Oh.
Because all you want to know is, should I use one more or one less than last set or last week, right? Once you start getting into 100 pounds, you start comparing, well, what I really like to get to that 150, right? Or, and so, or like, I'm 2 away from the stack. I got to use the stack. It's like, no.
Gotta use the stack.
No, so I always say, look, if that stack was 3 times bigger, you wouldn't even be thinking that right now.
I want to ask you about this, Doug, because I feel like since you've been training for so long, you probably have some good insight on how people can increase this. Over my training years, I've slowly been able to increase my ability to work each muscle group to a higher extent, like so more mind muscle connection. Right. But also what I've noticed is that I am working with certain movements with significantly lighter load than I was years ago and feeling the same, like a great connection to that muscle. And now, how can people develop that over time other than just, you got to train for years, obviously, but is there ways within training? Like I personally, and this is totally anecdotal, I like to slow things down. I like to stop at peak contractions and hold those contractions and go back to the beginning of the movement. I like doing that, even though since the set's going to take longer, I have to move with a little bit less volume, but I feel a better connection. So are there ways through your training experience that you think people can increase their connection to all the specific muscle groups they have on their body?
Well, it goes back to what I was saying before. You have to listen. You have to pay attention to what your body is feeling and telling you, and you have to stop using outside markers. The weight that, whether it's more or less than your training partner is using, what that paper says, what I did last time. Listen to your body, right? And that goes back to what I was saying about a muscle can grow more using less weight. There's no direct correlation, right? You will get more muscle growth sometimes using less weight because you're doing full range of motion, more deliberate contraction, no momentum, slower range of motion, more time under tension, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, the only hint is to stop trying to evaluate yourself by numbers that are not your own for that day. Every single day is unique. Don't worry about how much weight you're lifting. That's why I say if the weight stacks had numbers, I'd be just as happy. In fact, sort of silly here, our free motion machine has kilos on the left and pounds on the right, right? Well, obviously in America, we use pounds. But because the kilos are easier to see, I always just think 26.5. I'm not thinking how that reflects on my strength level, whether that makes me a man or not. Whether it compares favorably with last workout or 26.5, that means the next time I'll do whatever the next, it's just a marker to me. And that's what I recommend to people. Just use markers to indicate more than or less than last time or based on how you feel. But chase the feeling. Ultimately, chase the feeling.
I think a really good thing to ask here is because so many people aren't getting gym memberships because while things are going on with gyms where potentially they might close at some point again, let's hope not. Let's not say the word, by the way. This is YouTube. If we use the word, the dreaded C.
We already said it once.
We did?
Once.
All right, let's not say it again.
Right.
let's not say it again.
When I launched the attack.
Yeah, we don't need YouTube coming on us. So with that being said, people are making their own gyms in their garage. And a majority of people they're like, I need to get a stack of dumbbells. I need to get myself a squat rack and this and that. But in your suggestion, if someone is they have limited space and they want to focus on just muscle loading, what are the machines that you would suggest that they would get that would give them the most bang for their buck?
Well, that's what we did. My training partner and I built a garage gym, and it's wonderful. Is it as perfect as I'd like it to be? Well, if I could have a leg extension and a seated leg curl machine in there, I would add it. There's not enough room for it, but we do cable leg extensions and cable leg curls, and they're close enough. And we built a bench that's elevated so that when your leg goes up and down, it doesn't hit the ground, right? But we have a free motion machine, or a Tough Stuff also makes a good double adjustable cable machine, which gives you a lot of variation. And then we have a Tough Stuff multi-hip machine. And we have an adjustable decline bench, and we have a couple of seats and seat backs, and a set of dumbbells from 2.5 to 60. We're happy as can be. We do it the whole body: abs, lower back, biceps, triceps, deltoids, everything.
Wow. And just curious too. I mean, people are going to wonder, like, what ends up being the price range for a majority of these, like, decent, like, how much would they end up spending for the whole setup?
A double adjustable pulley machine, which kind of should be the centerpiece of a home gym because it offers so many options. I mean, you can literally do 12 exercises on that machine. Mm-hmm. Free motion tends to be a little expensive. Tough stuff is a little more economical. I think they run around $3,500. But you can get the same effect by getting 4 individual pulleys that are adjustable up and down and place them along the wall at certain distances. So on this one, you use A and B. On that one, you use A and C. On this one, you use D and C. So you can, the width that you need and then the height that you select. Mm-hmm. And those are $100 a piece if you just get the plate loaded version.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
so,
I think Titan Fitness makes one that's really easy. You just wall mount it.
Yeah, so you just wall mount $400 pulleys and you've got all your widths. The multi-up machine is fantastic. We actually use it for side raises too.
Yeah.
We built up the seat so you're at the right height, and then you get on the other side of it, you do the other side. And that's a fantastic exercise. And so we got 2 exercises of it, but that thing cost us $3,500. The decline bench costs us about $350. And then dumbbells are kind of expensive now because they're at a premium, hard to get. But that's kind of all you need. I'd say, for $8,000, $9,000, you could have a great home gym.
Yeah. One of the comments on our last episode that we had you on that got a little bit of attention, but I'm curious to ask because I want people to kind of understand what's going on. But the question was basically like, okay, if these are the most optimal movements and Doug's winning bodybuilding shows, how come he wasn't talking about this years ago? And I know you had just mentioned that you kind of started doing Brig 20 movements about 3-4 years ago. So before that, I mean, were you just doing like the traditional like compound movements and that sort of thing? And then again, also, why has it been so long to start to write the book and be more, seen when it comes to the Brig 20?
Okay, yeah, good questions. But as I said, the last 3 or 4 years, I've been using exclusively Brig 20 exercises.
Got it.
I didn't start calling them Brig 20 until a year ago. In fact, there's no mention of the Brig 20 in the book, even though the ones that are Brig 20 are named as the best 1 or 2 in each of the chapters for the muscle group. So, but here's the story is very simple. I started at 14 years old with a home barbell set, those plastic cement filled plates, and it came with one of those handbooks. Upright rows, barbell curls, bench press, barbell squat, just like everything else, right? And then I was at 14. At 15, I went to Barrel Pearl's gym. So, but I was always analytical, and I was discovering, I would have never thought that I was learning biomechanics. I didn't even know the word. I just knew that, for example, if I was doing a barbell wrist curl and the bench was flat that I was sitting on, I could feel too much tension at the bottom and not enough at the top. At 15 years old, I knew to raise up the backside of that bench and angle the bench like this. And all of a sudden, it took away resistance from the bottom, and I added it to the top. I manipulated the resistance curve at 15 years old, not even knowing there was such a thing as a resistance curve or a strength curve, right? I just knew it was more comfortable. So these ideas started slowly catching on, and I never, ever thought there would ever be a market for it. All I cared about was just my own enjoyment of my workouts. That's all. And then in 2005, I owned a gym in Pasadena from 1984 to 1995 for 11 years. And I couldn't keep it open. Too many other gyms came into town. It became too competitive. I did personal training for about 10 years. And then one of my clients wanted me to explore lumber, mahogany exportation out of Nicaragua with him.
Wow.
So I moved to Nicaragua and lived there for 2 years, exporting mahogany. And I left the fitness industry because I thought, the people who are making money in the fitness industry are the people who are lying. The infomercial makers, the people who are selling hype, nonsense products, the people who really want to tell the truth aren't getting compensated well. It's time for me to change industries. During the 2 years in Nicaragua, I started thinking about, well, maybe there's a market for someone who wants to tell the truth. Maybe it'll catch on. So it was just a thought. I came back and I started writing for Iron Man magazine. I wrote an article called the Case Against Overhead Presses. And I explained the 5 components that made it a compromised movement, 3 of which were risk-related and 2 of which were lack of benefit-related. And John Balick loved the article so much, he says, can you write more articles for us? So I said, yeah. So I started to do that, and I started getting more and more positive feedback, which started making me feel like I actually did have knowledge that people wanted. And so then I thought, well, maybe I'll start thinking about a book. So I started writing out what later ended up becoming the 16 factors that determine biomechanical efficiencies, because I had to get my table of contents in order. So what are the principles, right? I figured there have to be principles that are either in compliance with or in violation of to determine what is better than what. And so it took me 7 years to write the book. And during those 7 years, I was still learning. During that 7 years, I realized, I don't need to do the T-bar row anymore at all. So, it was such a gradual process. That's why you didn't hear about this before, because I didn't know about all of it until, at the very least, until I started writing the book, which was like 2009, 2010. Wow. And then, I started learning, because as you're writing it, you say, well, what about this? What about that? You ask the naysayer questions, right? What if someone asked me this? Well, then you find reciprocal innervation, you find activism, you find bilateral, you find all these things along the way. I mean, I literally went to school for 7 years while I was researching the book. Then when the book came out, it took me another 2 years. Well, I finished writing it 2 years to get it published. So it was 9 years after I set out writing it. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why you're just now hearing about all this stuff, is because it's been slowly coming to light, and that's why now you can't say, well, who's won Mr. Universe yet using the Break 20? Well, give it time.
That is the kind of the follow-up question. It's like, well, who has he shown, or who's doing this, or who has he coached that's won shows and this and that. But,
and I'll tell you, I'm 61 now. I can't do what I used to be able to do at 30. I wish that I could do that. I wish that I could prove with my own body that I could develop that kind of muscle. But you literally, your body just does not respond the same at 60 years old. It just doesn't.
Well, I mean, just straight up, like, I can personally say, like, again, I don't only do the movements that you talk about in the book, but I bought the book because I knew from what you're talking about, like, if I can get a lot out of these movements, what's the most I can get? If I can figure out how to do this efficiently, but also marry in the things that I enjoy progressing as far as my athleticism, I will make progress. And I have made progress. Yeah. Like, there's no reason anyone shouldn't add these in, along, like, you could do just those, or you could do those along with your powerlifting routine as your bodybuilder accessory movement, so you can get the most out of mechanical tension. Like, there's no reason you can't do that. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm just like,
you're being too logical, though.
But I'm also saying, in this book, this isn't like these are 20 exercises to do. Only do these. Don't. Yeah. That's not what this is about. This is how to evaluate exercises, right? Oh, by the way, that'll lead you to these 20. Right. But by the way, it'll also help you evaluate the ones that you are wondering about.
Yeah. Yeah. I fucking love it.
Yeah. What can you tell us about the Smart Training 365 website? Is that where you coach people, or is that just like more of a like a one-way street? People just can gain this knowledge.
Well, the Smart Training 365 is sort of the digital version of the book in expanded form. So like there are a lot of people that don't like to read. Right. So a lot of people like videos. So there's lots of videos on the Smart Training 365 video website. And there's also a certification exam. So you studied the book digitally, and then you take quizzes along the way, and then you get certified. You get biomechanics certified. And I think every trainer should be biomechanics certified, or at least biomechanics educated. I took ACSM certification years ago. They didn't even mention the word. Right. I mean, it's probably changed now, but if you're a trainer and you're dealing with resistance exercise, you have to know that your forearm is a lever. You have to know when it's maximized, when it's minimized, where the risks are, what a joint is supposed to do, when it's not supposed to do, what alignment is. Otherwise, you're not knowledgeable enough to be a trainer, frankly.
Yeah. And then, so running that website, there's going to be somebody out there that thinks that you do everything by yourself. And then there's going to be another subsection of people that are thinking you have an entire team behind you. How did you meet the one and only Mo Larby, and what's your guys' partnership?
Well, Mo has become a great friend of mine. He bought the book. And like so many people said, holy shit, this stuff makes so much sense. How could we not have seen this before? Right? So he contacted me and he said, can you come up and do a seminar up here in Canada? And that's when this thing happened.
The Coco.
Oh yeah, okay.
So that was kind of off. And so then he said, well, what if I just do a digital trainer certification? And I said, great. So we started working on the exam questions and all that. And then it started off that he was just going to do the certification in Canada. But I said, hey, if it's digital, might as well be worldwide. So that became that. And then basically what we decided was that, I'm a nerd. I'm just a science nerd. I don't like the commercial end of anything. And so I don't do well with digital or tech, and I don't do well with, video making and video editing. And he does very well with that. That's sort of his talent. So that's what happened is Mo just became my partner now, my other half in terms of the promotion of these principles. That's all. We're 50-50 partners. I am, the one who does the information, the content, but he's the one who helps me get the word out.
Nice.
That's sick. Yeah. And then I got to figure out exactly how to do it. But Mo actually just hit me up and he's going to offer everybody a 30% off discount off of what's it called? The True Bodybuilding Program.
Okay, great. That's one of our videos.
Yeah. We'll put that in the description as well as the promo code. So make sure if you guys are interested in more of that stuff to definitely take advantage.
Yeah, what he does too is he asks the hard questions. So you may have seen the interviews we do. He doesn't softball me. He asks the questions that the naysayer is going to ask, right? And that's good. We want those questions, right? We want to address those. We don't want to pretend they're not there. And what he does is he says, look, Doug, your focus here is on mechanics, and your focus personally has been bodybuilding, but not everybody is a bodybuilder. All right. So that information can be applied toward, the trainer who's helping a 93-year-old do rehab. Right. So let's do that. Let's provide these people with information that's useful to them. So that's what has led me and us now to a program that is usable by everyone for every application, whether it's John Gaglione in powerlifting, or whether it's, someone doing, physical therapy for someone who's been injured, because it's the same physics, it's the same biomechanical principles. Just understanding them helps you understand what is appropriate for this person or for that person.
It's amazing.
Andrew, want to take us on out of here?
I will. Let me see. Where am I at? Here we go. Thank you, everybody, for checking out today's episode. Sincerely appreciate it. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you are not already subscribed. Hit that bell notification so you don't miss the next time we go live. Shout out and thank you to Merrick Health for sponsoring today's episode. It's our blood work company. Really, you guys just have to hit them up. It's at merrickhealth.com/power project. You guys will see the Power Project panel. When you guys do at checkout, enter promo code Power Project for $101 off of that lab. Please follow the podcast at Mark Bell's Power Project on Instagram, at MB Power Project on TikTok and Twitter. My Instagram and Twitter is at I am Andrew Z. Nsima, where are you at?
At Nsima Inyang on Instagram and YouTube, at Nsima Inyang on TikTok and Twitter. Doug, where are you at? Along with that new TikTok.
I'm at Doug Brignole at Facebook, Doug Brignole at Instagram,
and TikTok.
BB Fitness at AOL.
At Mark Smelly Bell. Strength is never weakness. Weakness never strength. Catch you all later.